What if you could go back to fix a mistake from your past, to help a friend in need, to speak when instead you thought you should have been silent, to listen instead of talking over someone, to be more vigilant when your mind began to wander to less important matters? What if you could change just one thing about the past? What if you could have made the difference in someone's life? This is Brian Shaffer. Brian vanished from a bar in Columbus, Ohio on April 1st, 2006, never to be seen or heard from again. And for 18 years, Brian's family and friends have asked themselves all of these questions again and again. Was Brian murdered? Did he drop out of life? Could anyone have done anything to save him? "18 years of conjecture, theories, rumors, and debates have not moved us any closer to solving the mysterious disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Was he driven away by grief? Did he meet with foul play? Or does the secret lie somewhere within the walls of what was once a popular college bar?" On April 1st, 2006, Brian vanished from the Ugly Tuna Saloona in Columbus, Ohio, at 1:55 a.m. without a trace. Usually, if someone is serious about dropping out of their life, you'll see them start to distance themselves from family and friends. This will give them time to slip away before anyone notices and sounds an alarm. You may also see them start to liquidate any and all assets, because cash is king when you don't want to be found. And one of the greatest misconceptions is believing that the person has left the country. It's actually much easier to fade away in familiar territory. So then, what did happen to Brian? The details of this case do not fit into this mold in any way. Trying to apply logic to this case will just leave you chasing your tail. As we begin to sift through the facts, you must ask yourself, what did investigators miss? What clues did Brian leave behind? And most importantly, how did hundreds of security cameras miss capturing Brian during the time when he reportedly vanished? We will begin by taking a look at what was going on in Brian's life that may have been contributing factors in what happened to him. Brian was very close to his mother, Renee. The two of them were so close that when his mother encouraged Brian to pursue a career in medicine, he walked away from his dream of starting his own band. After graduating high school in 1997, Brian attended The Ohio State University for his undergraduate studies. 6 years later, he had his degree in microbiology. In 2004, Brian continued his studies at The Ohio State University College of Medicine. But some life-changing events were about to affect Brian's life in ways he couldn't have imagined. A fellow med student, Alexis Wagner, entered Brian's life. The couple quickly fell in love and started planning a future together. Life seemed to be going really well for Brian, and then tragedy struck. His mother was diagnosed with cancer. While juggling his studies and his first serious relationship, Brian would watch his mother slowly slip away. On March 6, 2006, Renee Shaffer died at the age of 51. 3 weeks later, Brian would vanish. From the moment Brian's mother passed away up until the time he went missing, there were conflicting reports about his mental state. Some said his grief was immense, while others claimed that Brian was coping and seemed to be upbeat about his future. His father, Randy, and younger brother, Derek, said that the passing of Renee had brought the three of them closer than they had ever been. On March 31st, 2006, the evening before Brian vanished, he had dinner with his father, and they talked about his mother. Brian tried to comfort his father by telling him that everything was going to be okay. Randy stated that his son looked tired, and he was concerned when Brian told him that he was meeting his friend, Clint Florence, for drinks later. Spring break had just begun, and to kick things off, Brian and Clint were going to some local bars to do some shots. Brian phoned his brother Derek to see if he would like to join them, but Derek wasn't in the mood for crowded campus bars and said he would take a rain check. Looking back years later, Derek told a reporter, "I've thought about that night over and over. What if I had been there that night? Would things have been different? Would my brother still be here? I carried that guilt around for a while." At 9 p.m., Brian called his girlfriend Alexis, who was out of town visiting her parents. Alexis said that Brian sounded fine. They were looking forward to flying to Miami on April 3rd to enjoy spring break. The trip was a Christmas gift from Brian's mother, a bittersweet memory of just how much Brian's mother loved him. Brian ended his conversation with Alexis after telling her that he loved her. It's at this point that Brian leaves his apartment to meet up with Clint to go bar hopping. The two young men consume several shots along the way. Sometime after 12 a.m. on April 1st, Brian and Clint were joined by their friend Meredith Reed in a bar called the Short North. After a while, the three decided to leave, and Meredith drives Brian and Clint to the Ugly Tuna Saloona for one last drink. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was located in the Gateway Building on North High Street. There is only one public entrance, and the only way to reach the second-story bar was by using an escalator. Let's now take a look at the security footage that shows Brian, Clint, and Meredith arriving at 1:15 a.m. According to Clint and Meredith, the three friends shared a last round, and then Brian walked away. He is last seen on camera at 1:50 a.m. outside the doors of the bar. The footage you're about to see is Brian talking to two intoxicated women that he offered to walk to their car. For whatever reason, Brian changes his mind, and you'll see him walk back towards the bar entrance. At 2 a.m., the bar closes, and Clint and Meredith wait outside for Brian, but he never shows up. Assuming he caught another ride home or walked the short distance back to his apartment, the pair decided to head home. The next day, Alexis arrives back to Columbus and makes several attempts to contact Brian, but is met with silence. Brian's father begins to get concerned, as this is not typical behavior. He tried to remain hopeful, thinking Brian was just hungover at a friend's house and he would eventually make contact. Meanwhile, Alexis waited for 2 days in Brian's apartment. Every hour that she didn't hear from him filled her with dread. This wasn't like Brian. Alexis continued to hold out hope that this was all just a bad dream, that Brian would show up with a perfect explanation for his absence, and they would board the plane to Miami just as they had planned. Brian had even hinted that he might propose. When April 3rd came and still there was no word from Brian, Alexis and his father reported him missing to the police. Sergeant John Hurst was the lead investigator in Brian's case. He worked around the clock to try and locate the missing young man. Hundreds of interviews were conducted, and thousands of hours were spent going over and over video from security cameras in the area. Columbus had more cameras than all the major cities in Ohio put together, so this was no easy task. As Hearst began to dig deeper into Brian's vanishing, many red flags began popping up. We'll now go through some of the details that left Sergeant Hurst completely perplexed. After going through the camera footage at the Ugly Tuna Saloon, Hurst was able to account for every person that went in and out of the bar, all but Brian. There were only 2 exits to the bar, the main one used by patrons and one inside the bar that led to a freight elevator. If Brian was so intoxicated that he took the elevator down, he would have found himself at a disadvantage. Once the elevator reached the first floor, it would have led out to a construction site that was going on next to the bar. It would have been extremely dangerous for Brian to try and navigate the site. There were several cameras on the surrounding buildings, but there was no footage of Brian entering the construction zone. There was also a movie theater next to the bar that was thoroughly searched, and Hurst found no evidence of Brian ever being there. Clint and Meredith both gave statements to authorities of how their night out with Brian unfolded. After giving his one and only statement, Clint lawyered up. Through his lawyer, Clint stated that he told authorities everything he remembered and had nothing more to add. He then respectfully declined to take a polygraph. Upon further inquiry, Hurst was able to obtain eyewitness accounts of a verbal altercation Clint had with Brian. This information has led some to question if the two were ever the best of friends. Hurst went on to reveal that the 2 women that Brian was seen talking to on the camera footage were too intoxicated to remember much of their conversation with him and were never given polygraphs. As the search ramped up, the Olentangy River that runs through Columbus was searched, along with the city's sewer system, without success. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search the surrounding area, but never picked up a scent. Then there was Brian's credit cards and bank account. There was no recent activity to send up a red flag. His cell phone did not have GPS enabled, so its location could not be determined. However, there was one odd occurrence with Brian's phone. Every day for 5 months, Alexis would call Brian and the calls would go directly to voicemail. During one of these calls, Brian's phone actually rang in and a tower pinged in Hilliard, Ohio, about 13 miles away from Columbus. Everyone hoped that this would be the big break in the case, but reports from Brian's cell phone provider stated that the rings coming through to the phone were due to a computer glitch. The only other mysterious clue that could shed some light on Brian's state of mind came from Alexis when she divulged some mixed signals that she was getting from Brian. Shortly before he vanished, Brian asked Alexis to drop everything and go away with him. Then, a few days before their scheduled trip to Miami, Brian told Alexis to move on and find someone else because he was struggling with his mother's death. Alexis was confused. On one hand, Brian seemed like he was distancing himself from her, and then, on the other hand, he was hinting at an impending marriage proposal. Clearly, Brian was struggling with his grief and trying to move forward in life. Now that we've covered nearly every detail about Brian's disappearance, let's move on to the different theories that have emerged during and after the investigation. 10 years after Brian vanished, 26-year-old Joey LaBute disappeared from the Union Cafe bar in Columbus. Joey stopped to have a drink with his cousin and his cousin's wife on March 5, 2016. Joey left the table to get a drink and was never seen again. Camera footage shows Joey leaving the bar by himself. His cousin called him several times before Joey finally picked up and said that he was driving and abruptly ended the conversation. The alarming part came when Joey's cousin found his car in the same location in the parking lot. The last communication came from a text received from Joey that didn't make any sense. The letters JNHSTIOJ were spelled out in the text. On March 29, 2016, Joey's body was found in the Scioto River. There was no water found in his lungs or apparent wounds. If Joey did not drown, then he was most likely suffocated and placed in the river. His case has never been solved. The next theory is the smiley face killings. 2 retired New York detectives allege that 45 young men found dead in bodies of water across the Midwest were victims of a serial killer. The FBI has confirmed that there is no evidence that the serial killer exists or that the deaths of these young men are in any way connected. The last theory comes from a piece of footage capturing Brian as he's headed back towards the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar. There's a claim that the footage depicts Brian either checking his phone and slipping it back into his pocket, or he's turning his phone off and placing it into the purse of one of the intoxicated women that he offered to walk back to their car. Brian's phone was never found in the woman's purse. As you can see, there are no obvious answers in this missing persons case. If Brian wanted to drop out of his life, he could have succeeded in many different ways, least of which would have been after consuming several shots of alcohol after bar hopping. But let's say that was Brian's intention. How can we then explain why his image is never captured on any of the security footage after he's seen headed back into the bar? We could easily theorize that Brian was killed inside the bar, but again, we don't have any footage of a suspect trying to dispose of a body. And of course, cadaver dogs never picked up on Brian's scent at the bar or the surrounding area. There are so many possibilities in this case. Whatever happened to Brian, it has undoubtedly left a trail of pain and uncertainty in its wake. Brian's disappearance left a profound impact in the lives of those who loved him and lost him in the blink of an eye. After a while, Brian's girlfriend Alexis eventually moved on with her life. She is a doctor now, married, and has a family of her own. What remained of her relationship with Brian has been boxed up and now sits in the back of her closet. Of course, curiosity about what happened to Brian still weighs heavy on her mind. Occasionally, you can find her on her computer checking for updates, as she still wonders about what might have been. Brian's father, Randy, spent every waking moment of his life searching for his son. It wasn't uncommon to see him slip on a pair of waders and search the Olentangy River for his son's body. There were nights that Randy couldn't sleep, and he would place calls to Sergeant Hurst in the early morning hours asking for updates. Or perhaps he was just seeking comfort from someone who was just as invested in the search as he was. 2 years after Brian went missing, Randy tragically lost his life when he was hit by a falling tree limb in a windstorm. This leaves Brian's younger brother, Derek, who had slowly lost his entire family. He continues his never-ending search for his brother. The not knowing eats away at him. He often laments over his decision not to meet up with Brian that fateful night. When asked what he thinks happened to his brother, Derek is quick to respond. "If I saw Clint, I'd say, 'Where the hell is my brother?' If anyone knows whether he is still alive or if something happened to him, it's Clint." In 2021, BCI released an age progression photo of Brian to generate tips. Brian would be 45 years old today. Please take a good look at Brian Shaffer. If you have seen him or know anything about his disappearance, please contact the Columbus Police Department at 614-645-4545 or Central Ohio Crime Stoppers at 614 645-4749. Are you obsessed with true crime content? Subscribe now and join our growing community as we analyze and discuss the details of some truly baffling cold cases. Browse our growing library of cold case investigations and immerse yourself in the mysteries that keep us up at night. Subscribe and join the EOJ community today. All it takes is a click.